powerful air force in the world.
The political framework of the US consists of the president, who serves as both head of state and head of government, and is elected for up to 2 four-year terms. Presidential elections are decided by an electoral college, with electeds apportioned to each state based on the size of its congressional representation. In most cases, all of the electors in a particular state cast their ballots for the candidate who won the statewide popular vote, regardless of the margin. 2 states, Maine and Nebraska, have chosen to divide their electoral votes between the candidates based on their popular vote performance in each congressional district. In other words, the American political framework is arguably quite bureaucratically complex.
Meanwhile, the political framework of Japan is far simpler, as it's made up of the Prime Minister, who is the head of government and is chosen by the freely elected parliament. The Prime Minister selects the cabinet, which can include a limited number of ministers who are not members of parliament. Japan's emperor serves as head of state in a ceremonial capacity. In many ways, the Japanese framework best resembles the Westminster parliamentary system in the United Kingdom.
Now, dear viewer, I hear you ask, when will these people ever talk about that question? Well, today is your lucky day, as our question in question is, how has the United States experienced democratic backslide in relation to Japan, particularly regarding civil liberties and political rights?
So, according to the Freedom House score, the United States has an 83 out of 100. That's made up of political rights getting a 33 out of 40, and civil liberties getting a solid 50 out of 60, which isn't bad at all.
Now, the nation we will be comparing the US to is Japan, and Japan scores a 96 out of 100, with political rights attaining a full score of 40 out of 40, and civil liberties securing 56 out of a possible 60. Now, this difference can be put to either the Japanese pointing imperial nationalist space lasers towards America, or something a bit more sinister.
What you are looking at right now is a comparison of the political rights score between the US and Japan from 2005 and 2022. In case you haven't noticed, the US has unfortunately experienced a prominent decline in its political rights score post-2011, in part due to the intensifying cases of gerrymandering by both Republicans and Democrats in the lead-up to Obama's presidency in 2013, which would go on to nurture a culture of messy partisan gerrymandering. The concept of REDMAP, short for Restricting Majority Project, helped refine and make gerrymandering that much more effective, and this was put forth by the Republican State Leadership Committee, specifically being a brainchild of Chris Jankowski, with its sole purpose being to increase Republican control of congressional seats as well as state legislatures, largely through the remapping electoral district boundaries with a focus on shifting swing states with a Democratic majority, such as Pennsylvania, Michigan, Ohio, North Carolina, and Wisconsin, by manipulating and restricting voter bases using information gathered in the 2010 U.S. Census, and as well as using sophisticated mapping software. In other words, REDMAP will cluster Democratic voters into a concentrated and more typically urban district, almost completely ensuring that the remaining district will be drawn to only a Republican majority, in which race and tax brackets unfortunately have been made to matter. The stark impact REDMAP has had on the electoral system is undeniable, as the 2012 House of Representatives election saw the Republicans winning control on the House of Representatives by a 33-seat margin, despite the Democrats receiving over 1.4 million more votes than the Republicans.
On the other hand, Japan saw an increase in its political rights score right around 2012, from a period of extended stagnation that's mainly attributed to Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's abolition of the Hatomander, which was a form of gerrymandering first established in the 1950s by Ichiro Hayatama to allow his party, the Liberal Democratic Party, or LDP, to form a two-thirds majority on its own in the Diet, which is Japan's version of a parliament. This also required vastly modifying Japan's constitution by practically one person. This graph plots the civil liberties score from Freedom House between Japan and the US from 2005 to 2022, and it's clear that the gradual decline seen with the plotted points of the US highlights the similarity this graph has with the political rights score graph. The decline around 2011 and 2012 can be attributed to how many George W. Bush-era practices regarding counterterrorism, such as the National Security Agency's tendencies to spy and collect voice and internet communications, were not critiqued by the Obama administration. Additionally, the unwillingness to amend the Patriot Act, close the detention facility at Guantanamo Bay, and severely prosecuting leaks of classified information, mainly pertaining to war crimes, and as well as the reintroduction of stop and frisk practices in major cities, are all cited as being key reasons for the decline in civil liberties.
According to civil libertarians, structural inequality and discrimination in wages and unemployment mean that racial and ethnic minority groups face long and running interrelated disparities in education and housing. De facto school segregation is a persistent problem, and the housing patterns that contribute to it are influenced by factors such as mortgage discrimination, which particularly affects Black and Hispanic homeowners. This, in turn, influences overall gaps in wealth and social mobility. For example, the median wealth of white families is 12 times the median wealth of Black families. Black people also face discrimination in healthcare and experience worse outcomes than their white counterparts. During the COVID-19 pandemic, people of color experienced strikingly higher mortality from the virus. Violence motivated by racism or other forms of group animosity is a regular occurrence in the United States. Asian Americans were the victims of a surge in discrimination and the hate crimes in 2020 and 2021, attributed in part to President Trump's attempts to focus blame for the pandemic on China, where the initial outbreak occurred. A white gunman racist killing of 10 Black people in Buffalo, New York supermarket in May 2022 illustrated the continuing threat from white supremacy, while the November murder of 5 people in Colorado nightclub that was popular with LGBTQ+ people reflected the persistence of hate crimes based on sexual orientation or gender identity.
In contrast, Japan is interesting in that it does better in areas that the US would typically be expected to excel in, such as the maintenance of an independent judiciary, whereas Japan enjoys a strictly independent judicial system in which judges cannot be removed arbitrarily. For serious criminal cases, a judicial panel composed of professional judges and saiban-in, or lay judges, are selected from the public and give out verdicts. Whereas in the US, the pattern of judicial appointments in recent years has added to existing concerns about partisan distortion of the appointment and confirmation process. Norm-breaking procedural maneuvering allowed Republicans to hold open an unusually large number of judicial vacancies under President Obama and then fill them under President Trump, including a Supreme Court vacancy that began during Obama's final year in the office. Trump filled 2 additional vacancies on the Supreme Court in 2018 and 2020 after deeply contentious Senate hearings and nearly party-line votes. These appointments cemented a conservative Supreme Majority. Furthermore, Biden sought to return to a more traditional use of presidential powers in 2022, focusing largely on commuting the sentences of people convicted of nonviolent drug offenses. President Trump had repeatedly used his power and authority in an arbitrary or politicized fashion, bypassing Justice Department processes and awarding pardons to many of his own personal associates or individuals whose cases were championed by his political allies. In many states, judges are chosen through either partisan or non-partisan elections, and a rise in campaign fundraising and party involvement in such elections over the last 2 decades has increased the threat of bias and favoritism in state courts. In addition, the executive and legislative officials in a growing number of states have attempted to exert greater control over state courts in recent years.